to another big story we're tracking for you right now. The Justice Department says it will be monitoring polling sites in California and in New Jersey, quote, from now up until Election Day. Now, these plans were announced Friday following requests from the Republican parties in each of those states. California and New Jersey are both led by Democrats, you should be aware. David Becker is CBS News' foremost election law expert. He's also the executive director and founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, and he joins us now. David, good morning. What do you make of the news we just shared there? These monitors from the DOJ in Democratic-led states apparently invited by Republicans to keep an eye on things.
Well, it's not that unusual for the Justice Department to send monitors, usually one or two attorneys, to observe a county and see whether or not they're complying with the access provisions of the Voting Rights Act, to see if they're allowing free and fair access to particularly minority voters and minority language voters. But how this came about was unusual. It's not usual to see this appear to come directly from requests made by the Republican parties in both California and New Jersey. The specific counties that those parties requested are the counties that the DOJ announced it was going to. And we don't see any allegation that the federal laws that might apply here are at risk in those counties. And we need to get a little more transparency out of that. These are purely state elections. We should remember this. There's not a federal race on the ballot anywhere. So the DOJ needs to do a better job of communicating what its justification is for being there. All that said, it's very unlikely any voters are going to see these monitors. There's probably just going to be a handful of monitors in all of these counties, and voters are already voting in huge numbers. We're seeing nearly 4 million people have already voted in California. We've seen over 750,000 in Virginia. We're seeing nearly 500,000 already having voted in New Jersey. So voters have already cast their ballots largely in these places.
So, David, I'm just curious, based on what you've just laid out, what then specifically would these federal officials be looking for? You know, give us some news our viewers can use. What role do they have? What is legal and then what isn't?
Yeah, I've done this literally dozens of times when I was a lawyer for the Justice Department. And your role as a Justice Department monitor is, first of all, you'd expect to be highly trained and expert on these things. And your role is purely to serve as a fly on the wall. You are not to interfere. You are not to talk to voters. You are not to talk to election officials. You are not to get involved in the process or touch any equipment or ballots. And if they are well trained, and there's going to be a small number of them, then there's nothing to worry about. We should remain vigilant, though, and watch and see whether this Justice Department is adopting what every single Justice Department, Republican and Democrat, has done in the past, which is to have monitors who are well-trained, who know that their role is purely to observe and not to interfere with the process. I don't expect a deviation from that, but we should keep our eyes open and see what happens in those counties.
Okay, good to know. I want to ask you about this item, which has just crossed in our newsroom in the past hour. A Republican governor of Indiana, Mike Braun, has called on state lawmakers for a special session to redraw his state's congressional boundaries. We've seen this in Texas. We've seen an effort being pushed in California in response to what Republicans are doing in Texas. What do you make of this development?
Well, first of all, we should recognize how odd it is to have mid-decade redistrictings. It's almost never happened in our history, voluntary mid-decade redistrictings for political partisan purposes. And this started with the White House urging Texas to try to find more seats that Republicans might be able to win. California responded and now has a ballot initiative where voters are going to decide in early November whether or not to change their districts as well. But that ballot initiative is linked to whether Texas redistricts or not. If Texas backed off, that ballot initiative would have no effect. Governor Braun here says he wants to maintain a fair voice for Indiana citizens, but we should also recognize 2 out of 9 districts in Indiana currently are represented by Democrats, and that's 22%. Indiana voted about 40% for Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate, in 2024. This tit for tat between the parties is something that I hope we'll eventually back down from, this trying to grab additional seats, because the people who really pay for this are ultimately the voters who are going to find themselves in new districts. They're not going to know who their representatives. They're going to be confused when they go to the polls in 2026. And the election officials who are going to have a ton of work to do to reconfigure their election system after these redistrictings are done.
Yeah, typically these take place after a census, after a population is updated. Lines get redrawn, not in between. David, great to get your insight with us today on this Monday. Thanks for being with us.